You have been offered an opportunity that should excite you. Instead, you immediately began building a list of reasons you are not the right person for it. Your background, your past mistakes, the gap between who you appear to be and who you know yourself to be on the inside. The voice that says, they have the wrong person. If they really knew you, they would never have asked. That voice has a clinical name. Psychologists call it imposter syndrome, the persistent internal conviction that you are a fraud, that your positioning is undeserved, and that it is only a matter of time before someone notices the gap between your reputation and your reality. Approximately 70% of people experience it at some point. But among visionary leaders, people called to high-impact, high-stakes, highly visible roles, it operates at a different level of intensity. And no story in Scripture documents its full anatomy more precisely than the moment Moses stood before a burning bush. Moses was 80 years old when the bush appeared. 40 of those years had been spent in Midian, in exile, in obscurity, tending sheep in the desert. Before that, he had been raised as Egyptian royalty, and between those two lives was a single day that had defined everything since. He had seen an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. He had intervened. He had killed the Egyptian. He had buried the body in the sand. By the next day, the story was already spreading. He fled. So when God spoke from the burning bush and said, "Go back to Egypt, stand before Pharaoh and lead my people out," Moses was not hearing a calling as a blank slate. He was hearing it as a man who had tried once to step into leadership, and who had watched it collapse catastrophically. The burning bush was not Moses' greatest moment of opportunity. It was, psychologically, his greatest threat, because the opportunity was enormous enough to confirm his deepest fear, that he was exactly the wrong person. Moses' response to God's calling is one of the most meticulously documented cases of imposter syndrome in human history. He did not simply say no, he built a legal case. 5 distinct objections, each one targeting a different domain of his perceived inadequacy. The first, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? Identity inadequacy, the foundational mantra of the fraud complex, not a question about logistics, a statement about worth. The second, what if they ask me your name? What shall I tell them? Knowledge inadequacy. I do not have the information required for this role. The third, what if they do not believe me or listen to me? Credibility inadequacy. My past disqualifies my future authority. The fourth, I am not eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue. Ability inadequacy. There is a specific concrete flaw that makes me structurally unfit. The fifth, after God had patiently answered every previous objection, please send someone else. The mask comes off entirely. After all the sophisticated rationalization, Moses finally says what was underneath all of it from the beginning. I do not want the exposure. I do not want the risk. Find someone who will not have to live with the terror of being found out. This is the full progression of imposter syndrome, from intellectual self-disqualification to the manipulation of concrete flaws, to the raw, unvarnished desire to remain invisible. The speech impediment deserves its own examination. Whether Moses had a literal physiological difficulty or whether his slowness of speech was an anxiety response, the psychological function is identical. He took one specific, tangible imperfection and elevated it to the status of a total disqualifier. This is a precise, clinical pattern. The imposter does not simply feel inadequate in general. They identify one concrete flaw, the accent, the background, the gap in their CV, the diagnosis, the thing they have never told anyone, and they use it as a legalistic argument for permanent disqualification. This flaw becomes a shield, because as long as that flaw exists, they do not have to test whether the deeper fear is true. The deeper fear is not, I cannot do this because of my stutter. The deeper fear is, even if I could speak perfectly, I might still not be enough. The flaw protects you from finding that out. Modern leaders do this constantly. The executive who delays the board presentation until the data is perfect, because imperfect data is the reason they cannot present, not because they are terrified of public scrutiny. The founder who waits until the product is fully built before seeking investment, because the unfinished product is the reason, not the fear of being seen and evaluated directly. The specific obstacle is almost always a proxy for the underlying terror of exposure. Moses called it his speech. God was not interested in the speech. God's response across all 5 objections follows a consistent pattern. He does not argue with Moses' self-assessment. He does not say, "You are wrong about yourself, you are actually more capable than you think." He says something more precise than that. He says, "I will be with you." This is the theological and psychological pivot of the entire encounter. The cure God offers for imposter syndrome is not inflated self-confidence. It is mission confidence. It is the shift from asking, "Am I qualified?" to asking, "Is this worth doing?" Because imposter syndrome is self-referential. It keeps the focus on the internal question of whether you are enough. And that question, examined alone, never resolves. The research on imposter syndrome confirms this. The feeling of readiness does not arrive before the task. It does not arrive after the task either, in most cases. What shifts is not the internal sense of adequacy. What shifts is the relationship to the mission. The leaders who break through imposter syndrome are rarely those who one day finally felt ready. They are the ones who decided the work mattered more than the feeling. Moses was not sent because he was the most qualified person in the desert. He was sent because someone had to go. And God had already decided it would be him, not despite his history, but through it. The 40 years in the desert are worth a moment of attention. Moses spent 4 decades in obscurity after his failure. No title, no influence, no audience. And it was precisely in that obscurity that he learned the terrain, the patience, the endurance for leading people through a wilderness. His inadequacy was not an obstacle to the mission. It was the preparation for it. History is consistent on this point. Churchill was a failed politician when World War II began. Lincoln lost 8 elections before the presidency. Mandela led a movement for 27 years from prison. The pattern of the reluctant, fractured visionary leader is not an exception in history. It is the dominant template. The person with the cleanest record and the most untroubled confidence is almost never the one the moment chooses. It tends to choose the one who knows what failure costs and goes anyway. Here is what this means for you. First, recognize the 5 excuse pattern. Imposter syndrome rarely presents as a single clean refusal. It presents as a sequence of escalating rationalizations, each one more specific and seemingly reasonable than the last. When you notice yourself building a legal case for your own disqualification, stop and name it. Not the specific objection. The pattern. You are not evaluating the opportunity. You are avoiding it. Second, separate the flaw from the disqualification. You have real limitations. Every leader does. But ask honestly, is this limitation genuinely preventing the work? Or is it functioning as a shield that protects you from finding out whether you have the deeper capacity? Moses' speech did not stop the Exodus. Your version of the stutter is not what you think it is. Third, move before you feel ready. The readiness never arrives first. It is built through the doing. The first speech, the first decision, the first failure navigated, the first crisis survived. Moses' confidence did not come from the burning bush. It came from the 10 plagues, the parted sea, the manna in the desert. The evidence that you can do it is on the other side of beginning, not before. Drop a comment below and tell me, what is the specific stutter you are using as a reason to delay something that is genuinely calling you? You do not have to share what it is, just sit with the question. If this kind of content is reaching you, subscribe.